Okay. Welcome to everybody who's coming through at the moment. I'm just going to give people another minute to arrive, so bear with us as we wait for some more people to come through. Hello, Bianca. Welcome to all of you. As you're coming through, I will let you know that you're going to be on mute for the duration. Sorry about that. But we do have the option of using the chat function, which we will go to for questions. So that's where the questions will go for the end of the event tonight. Great. So we have most people who are coming are here, but some will trickle in a bit later. So I might just start proceedings and then we'll go from there. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. In this area here, it's the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I would like to pay my deepest respects to elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge that because we're here on Zoom, we are zooming out onto the lands of lots of different Indigenous owners, and I'd like to pay my respects to all of their elders as well. This is Aboriginal land. It always was, and it always will be, and sovereignty was never ceded. And this is NAIDOC week, so it's a very special time to be meeting on Aboriginal land as we celebrate the Indigenous people. So welcome to everybody. And as I said to the people who were here at the beginning, you'll be on mute for the duration of this event. But we do have a chat function here on Zoom, and that is where I'm going to encourage people to put their questions. I'm going to send around a link to the book now, and that's turning up in your chat so you know where your chat function is. Now, that is where you can also type back to me, and you can type questions at any time during the event tonight, and I'll save them up for the end when Laura will throw back to me for questions. So, really, it's just my time now to hand over to our speakers for tonight. So, of course, we're here to hear from the wonderful Sophie Overett, who is an award-winning writer and cultural producer. Her stories have been published in Griffith Review, Going Down Swinging, Overland Online, Sleeper's Almanac, and elsewhere. She won the 2018 AAWP Short Story Prize, and her work has been shortlisted for multiple awards, including the Tex Prize and the Richell Prize. Her first novel, A Rabbit, is the winner of the 2020 Penguin Literary Prize. So we're very happy to have Sophie here, an ex-Brisbane person. So welcome to Sophie. And in conversation with Sophie tonight is the wonderful Laura Elvery, who is a bit of a hero of mine and of most of the Brisbane writers, I think, because she's just amazing. She's a writer from Brisbane. She's also the author of 2 short story collections, Trick of the Light and Ordinary Matter, both published by UQP, and honestly, both some of the most amazing writing you will read. So please do check that out when you can. I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Thank you, Chrissy. Hello, everyone. It is so good to see you all here tonight. We were just talking about how delighted we were with the smart decision to always have this on Zoom. It always has been a Zoom event. So lovely to see you all. I'll begin by acknowledging that the land I'm living and working on is unceded Aboriginal land. The Yagara and Turrbal peoples are the traditional custodians, and I pay my respects to their elders and to any First Nations readers and writers who are in our audience tonight. As Chrissy said, it's also NAIDOC week. The theme is Heal Country, and Avid Reader has a list of books by First Nations writers front and centre on its website for you to support this week and also every single week. So I encourage you to have a look there, buy some books to keep or to share with others. And when you're on the Avid Reader website, you can obviously go and buy Sophie Overett's debut novel, The Rabbits. Thank you, Sophie, for joining us, and congratulations. This is sort of your first face-to-face, as it were, event. So welcome back to Brisbane, to Avid Reader, and welcome to everybody Zooming in. It's really exciting to launch your book tonight with you here, Sophie.
having me. It's lovely to be launched by you.
Oh, you've got this beautiful book, which I'm holding here on my lap. It was too distant to put on the bookshelf, so here it is. And so in The Rabbits, Sophie, as you would know, and everyone who hasn't read it and will go and buy it later on tonight, Delia Rabbit is a mother dealing with a broken down relationship, an uninspiring job teaching art to 20-somethings, a blistering heatwave across Brisbane, and then suddenly the disappearance of her 16-year-old son, Charlie. Echoes of Delia's past have come to meet her face on. Several decades ago, her beloved sister also disappeared, also during terrible weather conditions. Delia's oldest child is her daughter, Olive. Mother and daughter are often at odds with each other, and at the outset of the novel, it's very difficult to imagine a future where they won't be at odds with each other. And Delia's youngest boy, sensitive and attuned Benjamin, is keenly feeling his brother's loss. Add to this a very ill grandmother, a reappearing father, complex new friendships, and this heat without relief. And Delia, Olive, and Benjamin are on the cusp of some bad decisions and some moments of great discovery. Sophie's moving and magical novel, The Rabbits, won the 2020 Penguin Literary Prize and has just been published this week. So tonight I have questions for you, Sophie, and there'll be also time at the end for audience questions, as Chrissy said, so have those handy as we have our conversation. Like most manuscripts, Sophie, yours has been kicking around for a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's been shortlisted. It's been awarded residencies all the way back to 2014 and obviously a bit before that. So, 6 years, give or take, in the making. Can you talk about how you keep going? Like, on top of your very obvious talent, you must be quite tenacious and resilient.
Yeah, thank you. That's very lovely. I think persistence is one of the key kind of things with writing, or with any creative industry. I tend to remember Tim Minchin's ABC documentary about when he was making Matilda. And one of the things that he said in that is that so much of creative process and having a creative career is like getting through the woods, and you're hacking away at these trees and at these plants, trying to find the path, trying to find the road. And then you finally break through and you get to the road, and the news trucks roll up and they're like, how'd you do it? How'd you get there? And you look back and you've got no idea how you did it. All you can see is the forest. Yeah. All you can see is the woods. All you can see is the plants. The thing is, you keep going, and that's very much, I think, the thing creatively and professionally. This was a manuscript that was always it was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. It never quite made it down the aisle. It was shortlisted for quite a few things. And that was kind of one of the fun things about the Penguin Prize, is that when it got shortlisted, I was completely thrilled and not expecting it to go any further. Really? So I kind of forgot about it in the process between shortlisting and winning, which was because, like I said, it had been shortlisted for the Rochelle Prize, and it had gotten the Queensland Literary Award Fellowship back in 2015, which was an incredible thing, which really helped me to develop it and work on it. But after that, it had kind of gotten into a couple of conversations with different publishers, but then never really gotten any further. It had gotten into a couple of conversations with agents, but then not gotten any further. And so it just kind of, like I said, just always felt like there was this barrier for it.
And it was kind of prizes, Text Prize, Richell Prize, the Catherine Susanna Pritchard Fellowship.
Yeah, there was a lot of love for it, which was good, but it just never quite was over the line, and it was never quite what people were looking for. And I think as well, because I don't think of myself as a particularly fashionable writer. Like, I don't think I write what's necessarily the moment, I guess, in that sense. So I don't. It just never quite found its place or found its audience, which is why the Penguin Prize was so amazing, because Meredith Kernow, who was my publisher at Penguin, just got it instantly and just loved it and was a huge champion of it from the get-go, which was just
And so did you have a sense, if you're not a fashionable writer, you think, or people were saying, oh, what about you do, like a lot of authors before it gets published, what about you do this, what about you do that? Do you sort of have to stick to your guns a little bit and say, no, this is sort of the book I want to write, and I'll write it out till it finds its home a little bit?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's trial and error. I mean, I've been writing for probably about 12 years now, and I've been writing short stories. I've had more than 20 short stories published, and as you know, I think you find your voice, you find what works for you, and you find what the process is. And feedback that I'd get when I was a younger writer, where it was, you know, maybe try and change up your style a bit, and I did, and certainly some of that advice I took on board, and some of that advice I was like, oh, this actually is not for me. This is not right. And I think that is something that you just feel out and you learn, as I'm sure you're very aware of too, is I think you work out what writer you are and what sort of stories that you want to tell. And it's amazing when you find an editor who's in sync with that, who can work with you, but also know exactly what sort of writer you are as well, which is the experience that I had with Penguin. Yeah.
So you didn't have an inkling when you entered the Penguin Prize. That was my next question. Why the Penguin Prize? I mean, it's $20,000, so that's that's huge.
Yeah.
But you didn't have an inkling. This is it. This is going to be it. You say you forget about it. That's a real gift, to forget about something you've entered. I think that never happens.
I submitted it the last minute as well. I'd kind of been tinkering with it again after the Ritual Prize, and I'd been working on it off and on, but I was actually really focusing on a different project at the time, and I was trying to get that ready to submit. So I was trying to make that good enough, and at the end of the day, it just wasn't. And so, because it was, the deadline was right there, and I was like, screw it, I'm just going to submit the rabbits again, and just maybe. Because at that point, the rabbits had been in the bottom drawer, and it was living there for a little bit, which was a bit of a sad thing, as it always is, I think, when you kind of are just like, it's not the time for it. So yeah, it was really luck of the draw. Like, I think it was about 3 hours before the deadline that I ended up submitting.
Yes.
So I was that person. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, it's a prize for people who aren't aware, it's an unpublished, would you say unpublished literary fiction prize based on the past. You know, they've had a few winners now, Imbi Nimi and James Watson this year. Is that how you would describe it to someone who was thinking about entering? Let's say there's someone here who wants to know very briefly what it is.
Yeah, I'd say it's unpublished literary fiction. Generally, but I think they're pretty open-minded. I think there was a lot more genre diversity in the shortlist.
Okay, yeah.
Than necessarily that specifically, but I think it definitely leans literary from the previous winners as well.
And also the genre of whatever you've got in the drawer 3 hours before, just put it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
Things off.
And Sophie, like you said, you've been writing for 12 years. You have an agent who is here tonight. You've worked in a writer's centre. That's how you and I met back in, say 2013, when you were so lovely and so generous and helpful to me. You have such deep industry knowledge, and you've also cultivated really great relationships. So what does it mean to you to be a good literary citizen these days?
I think it's everything to be a good literary citizen, and I think it's been interesting going through this whole process with COVID as well, because I've become very much, especially being in Melbourne for the 111-day lockdown. It's like you start to think about civic duty a lot, and you know, like what is your responsibility to the community that's around you? And I think there's this extremely like a rhetoric these days around, you know, you don't owe anyone anything, and I really don't like that as an idea, as a rhetoric that we talk about, because I think we owe each other everything. Otherwise, what's the point? And even I was really lucky when I got the job at Queensland Writers Centre, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I knew that I loved writing, but that was kind of it. And I had the team there at the time was incredible, and really kind of was so much about paying it forwards and fostering community and supporting community, and about what that meant to what was the point of being a good writer if you didn't have a good writing community. And a part of that is feeding into it and helping it to grow. And I mean, Brisbane's writing scene has been amazing. I think over the last 10 years in particular, I think it's really grown substantially and flourished. And that's a testament to the people who are working within that community to make that happen.
Yeah. You really have helped a lot of people, I think, through QWC over the years. I think you might not be aware of that, but you have. Okay, back to the rabbits, which everybody will buy straight after our chat. I read a post you wrote the other day, Sophie, where you spoke about writing a different version of the rabbits, your debut book, if you had your time over. Probably like all of our debuts would be different.
Yeah.
What sort of excites you about this realization about yourself, about this beautiful book, but, you know, having this very honest realization?
Yeah, well, I'm so proud of The Rabbits as a book, but like you said, it's been one I've been working on for a really long time. And it's this kind of realization of looking at it and seeing it as what it is. It feels like it almost feels like a time capsule to me of the writer that I was in this period of my life, which is invigorating and exciting because it means that I've grown as a writer and I feel like I've developed, and that my skill set's different, the type of stories that I'm interested in are different, and I mean, I still am very interested in this story, and I love this story, like I said, and I'm so proud of it. But but you know, if I was the same writer at the end of writing it as I was when I started, I don't think I'd be much of a writer at all. Because if you're not growing and if you're not challenging yourself constantly, then you're going to be telling the same story over and over and over again, which I don't know any writer who actually wants to do that.
So it's time to move on, time to let it go, while still being very proud of this beautiful book that you've worked on for so long. Sophie, I have an inkling, this is just a vibe I had, that perhaps one of your three central characters in The Rabbits was bigger at the start. So we have this trio of really distinct narrative voices: Delia, the mother; Olive, her oldest child, the daughter; and Benjamin, the youngest. How did that trio come about and sort of shift in each draft? And how did your interest in each of them change, or the ease of writing three voices?
Yeah, it changed quite drastically. The very, very, very first draft I wrote of this, like way back in 2014, was a group of friends. It wasn't a family at all. So Charlie was in it, and Olive was in it. None of the other characters were. So that kind of, and it was during when I reread that draft, like I really believe there's a great Stephen King quote where he says, you know, the first draft you write of a book is you learning how to write a bok. And I think that's really true. Yeah. And so I think that first draft that I wrote, like I look back at it now and it's so bad. There's a lot of those sorts of things are, and I'm like, obviously that's so different from the story that it ended up becoming. And because Charlie had much more of a, I think, presence in that draft as well. Like he's obviously very present in this novel, but the relationships were different. And the relationship between him and Olive was more prioritized. But there was also, like I said, a lot of, like his friend, he's got one line mention in the second chapter, who he's supposed to be studying with and isn't, was a major character in that original draft. But then especially, I think there was one scene in it when I was rereading it, which was about Delia. And Delia really felt like the in to what that story was supposed to be. So kind of I ended up scrapping the first draft pretty much entirely. I think I've still got it somewhere on my hard drive. It's not one I think it's worth keeping. But it was, kind of through that rewriting process, I really took it back to basics and was like, well, what's this story about? And for me, this is a story about the importance of being seen. And the importance of not only being seen, but feeling seen by the people that matter to you, and about what happens when you're not. Which was, I'm kind of realizing that really unlocked, I think, the story overall, and the relationships just sort of tumbled out of that. Like it felt really logical that Charlie would have a younger brother as well. Like it just, that kind of all came out of that, of understanding, I think, better that through line about what it is to be seen.
And also a good lesson in why you never stop at a first draft. Like,
yes.
Stopped at that first draft before realizing who your in was, or what it was actually about, or what you were trying to say. But all of what you just said about being seen really comes through clearly. And I was wondering if you could read an excerpt for us, please, Sophie.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm going to read the opening. My copy here too. I'm going to read the opening of the book, which is essentially a prologue. Cool. So, the night Charlie Rabbit disappears, Delia thinks of her sister. Not of the last night she'd seen her when Beau had smiled at her with tea-stained teeth, her cushiony lips pulled fat across them, nor of Beau's brittle bones, burning all those months later in the smoky city crematorium. Rather, she remembers the sticky summer nights of their childhood spent at the hospital their mother worked at, when they turned old stretchers into tombs and bandaged each other like Egyptian mummies. That was before video games and mobile phones, before the cocky, parted knees of boys, a time when Delia was still Del and Bo was still breathing, a time, a world that was just for them, their small children's bodies contorted into whatever space they'd fit, and their voices lowered, always, because every word felt like a secret and every breath a code. And they played, of course they played, hopscotch and Red Rover and Tiggy, but nothing more than hide and go seek. Nothing more, because there was nothing Bo was better at than hiding, folding her body below bed frames and inside vanities, her little feet tucked beneath her, her arms so tightly pressed to her sides she'd seemed like barely a thing at all. Del was not so good. Del liked to be seen, liked to be found, liked to catch these moments of discovery, feel her firm skin, hold her own wandering gaze in whatever mirror would have her. She liked to take up space. Of course, this meant Bo inevitably found her. You're no good at this, she'd tell her, loud, accusatory, and Del was inclined to agree. So it was through some mix of genetics and luck, both good and bad, that Charlie had come out of Delia so much like Bo, her aptitude for hiding appearing in him just like Delia's green eyes and Ed's gangly limbs. Charlie could hide before he could sit, stand, run, and Delia spent too many hours of too many days pulling him out from below clothing racks and cabinets, or finding him slipped up inside the roof's rafters, his long, skinny legs curled beneath his long, skinny body, his toothy child's grin a reminder of what she had lost. And she'd felt it even then, the fear that he was just like Bo and not like her at all, that he'd leave her just like Bo had. It startled her how much she was afraid of it, because no matter how often their mother had called that coil of spirit in them wanderlust or walkabout, a pair of nomad feet, and now you see me, they had all known what it really was, a little disappearing act.
Thank you, Sophie. Everyone's clapping. You can't hear it. Everyone's clapping. And straight away from there, that after that prologue, we're into this incredible scene setting. Well, we're into a scene with Delia at the art college, but after that, we see her moving through Brisbane. And Brisbane is such a central part of this book. And I really admire when writers are very specific about place and, you know, really sort of drop their pen and say, this is the river and these are the names of the suburbs and here's the school, and you can have a bit of a sense of where it's taking place. And you evoke it just so well. It's very hot. It's extremely hot. You know, the grass is overgrown in the rabbit's house compared to these other houses in their street. You know, and everything is sort of excessive. The fruit is rotting. There's the grotesqueness of, you know, there's a scene where it's really quite repulsive, but beautifully done, where, you know, you've come home from a hot day. This is maybe admitting too much about myself when I used to live in a share house, but you come home from a hot day and no one has taken out the bin for several days and there are maggots through the share house. Except this is Delia, who's a grown woman with 3 adult children. Chrissy's giving me a thumbs up. You know, so it's this feeling of excess. It's relentless. It's sweaty. It's also very sexy in parts. So did place come first for you, I guess, is the question there.
Yeah, it really did. I really wanted to write a novel about Brisbane. I really didn't want to write, because I love Brisbane. Brisbane's my home. It's where I'm from. It's where I grew up. It's where, I only moved to Melbourne a couple of years ago, so it's still very fresh in my head. And it's a place that I love to come home to, you know, but it's, and I was really inspired by the heat. I find it weirdly creatively invigorating. It was funny being at Tin House, because I'd taken a very early draft of The Rabbits to Tin House Summer Writers Workshop in Portland, Oregon, which was amazing. And
you missed that whole bit. You skipped that bit, Sophie. Go back to the part where you got to go to Tin House. Oh my gosh.
Yes. So yeah, I got to go to Tin House in Portland, Oregon, which was amazing. But 2 of the keynote speakers were Julia Elliott and Karen Russell, so they were both incredible. And because Julia Elliott did this keynote speech about heat and magical realism, which was in particular talking about Florida, because both her and Karen Russell are from Florida, and talking about how the heat just has a parasite in it that crawls into your brain and lays eggs. Like, that's just the only way that she can describe it, and the way that magical realism comes out of these really hot places. And I think that was like the magical realism was already in the rabbits. It was already set in Brisbane. Heat was already a part of it, but I think it really let me lean into it in a way that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't have gone. And just especially them talking about how Florida informs their magical realism, thinking about how Brisbane could inform the magical realism of this novel became really, really important to me during the process of that, and also in all subsequent drafts of it.
And you've got these specific suburbs, you know, and specific place names as well. You know, like Kangaroo Point exists and East Brisbane exists, and then you've made up this sort of other suburb called Shepherd. And I really like that mixing together of the real and the freedom, I guess, it also allows you as a writer to do a bit of artistic license with the particular workings or geography of the suburb where you want the rabbit family to live.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I kind of liked the thought that would add to the uncanny as well for people from Brisbane. Like this idea that you've got everything that's familiar, but also this whole whole sort of group of things that aren't familiar, that aren't real, but still are just enough that I was hoping that it would kind of add to the atmosphere. But also, like you said, it's good in terms of giving you a bit of creative license to play around a bit more.
Suburb, but not quite this suburb, but this suburb, but not quite. So it is, I think you've achieved that. And I think there's so much here for readers in terms of finely drawn and very meaningful themes as well, Sophie. The Rabbits has themes, I think anyway, of loss and how it shapes us, visibility, disappearing, the reverb of secrets, drawing, which maybe you can talk a bit about, and, you know, sort of constructing versus being destructive. Olive and her friends take to an abandoned house that they find with bats and fists and, you know, really sort of take it apart, this house that's had squatters in it. In another small example that doesn't give anything away, by the novel's end, Olive sees something rather lovely in her boring and unremarkable boss that she hadn't seen before. I'm always conscious of talking about themes with another writer because writers, I think, very rarely or don't always, you know, signpost their novels in this way or plant it in this way. But how do you negotiate plot and theme and is it sort of organic for you?
I think it's pretty organic on the whole. I mean, I do, the themes of being seen were ones that I had in mind at the start, because I was interested in thinking about how, because I think always the best magical realism is when it's reflective of things that are happening in the story overall, as opposed to it just kind of being shoehorned in. And so I really wanted to explore, you know, the kind of the theme of not being seen, and had that very front of mind throughout the process. But I think a lot of the others kind of did just crop up. I am kind of obsessed with this idea of collateral damage narratives though, which is something that, what I like to call collateral damage narratives. So I'm interested in the story, what happens to the people in the peripheral of the story, because arguably, you know, Charlie should be the hero of this story in a traditional structure, but actually taking him out of it and making it about the family who's kind of left to grapple with his loss and with his disappearance was just really appealing to me. That's what I find kind of creatively interesting. So that was kind of very much one of the things that was a big entry point for me in writing this.
And very different from that first draft you said, where he was far more central to it.
Yeah.
What's another collateral damage novel you enjoy? Can you think of one?
Well, I'd say The Lovely Bones is the one that always springs to mind, but even she's still got a voice in that, so I'm always a bit reluctant. It's actually more of a TV show actually that I always tend to think of in this, which is American Crime, not American Crime Story, not to be confused with that, it's a different show, but it's also American Crime. Yes, it's an anthology series and it's basically about impact on communities after crimes happen. So it's actually not following the investigation directly, it's kind of about, like in the first season, it's about a breaking and entering gone wrong, but it's in a neighbourhood that's being gentrified, and it uses that as an incident, which to look at the ripple effects on race within the community. So it's like a lot of that sort of stuff, which I just find really, really compelling.
And you love a TV show as well, don't you, Sophie?
I do love a TV show. I'm a big big movie and TV person as well as a book person. Yeah.
The scenes at the nursing home, St. Anne's. So Delia, who you said became your entry point and starts the book after that prologue, her mother is at this nursing home, a sort of a bit of a drive away from their house. And they're very moving scene where Delia's mother, Rosie, is reaching the end of her life. How did that part come about? And at what point in sort of writing the manuscript did you, we've got Rosie, Delia's mother, Olive's mother, Delia, and there's this very complicated chain of relationships there. But this nursing home stuff, I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I think that was something that did come in kind of midway through, and that was because my grandfather had just gone into a nursing home. And so seeing, I think, a lot of how that relationship, how all of our relationships with him changed because he was in there. And I mean, we were all very close, so we didn't have a relationship like Delia has with Rosie, where they're estranged when Rosie goes into the nursing home. And so Delia having to go and care for her becomes like both a burden, but also kind of this reconciliation with the past, which she has had no interest prior to that in exploring, which is very different, I guess. But I guess kind of going and visiting my granddad a lot in the nursing home, you think a lot about who these people are and about what their stories are. And I knew that I wanted Delia to have a difficult relationship with her mum, and I was curious about bringing her mother into the story. And so kind of during all the process of that, it just became really organic during a draft to really bring her in a way that I think really amplified Delia's childhood trauma of having lost not just her sister, but lost her family in the process of losing her sister, which brought to light more about what Delia's kind of facing now with Charlie too.
And I think it's also worth pointing out how fascinating a character Delia is. She's a functional mother. She's I would say an organized mother and a caring mother, but she just doesn't describe herself as a natural mother or a devoted mother. And, she sort of alludes to that this didn't come naturally to her, even though she goes through the motions and loves her children. But that also plays out in those scenes in St. Anne's. And I find those sort of complex mother relationships totally fascinating, that she's not fitting into, there's no one narrative in any space of what a mother looks like, even in fiction, but I think you've written Delia to sort of rebel against quite a number of norms.
Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of the same. I'm just really fascinated by representations of motherhood in storytelling. I feel like it's one of those areas that we think's got a lot, that's written about a lot, but isn't necessarily. And seeing a lot of the women in my life, because I'm not a mother, but seeing a lot of the women in my life who are, and having people I'm extremely close to who are, and just seeing, I don't think there's any two identical experiences. And being drawn to Delia as a mother, but also as a daughter, was something that became really central to the story. And so her relationship with Rosie, like I just said, before, about being impacted by Beau's disappearance so starkly, but also their relationship not really being great beforehand, and Delia going into motherhood thinking she was going to be better than her mum at it, and then finding it actually wasn't what she wanted. And I was just curious about, and because I'm interested in stories where people work hard for something that they think is going to make all the difference in their life, and then it doesn't.
That's beautiful. That's really interesting. Chrissy just put a call out for questions as well, which I meant to do. So if you have questions in about 10 minutes, I'll throw over to Chrissy. Sorry, this is very fascinating, Sophie. We could talk about it. I don't want to do any spoilers at all about the magical, excellent turns you take in this novel. But for the listeners tonight, I'd love for you to discuss your affinity with the fantastical in fiction and talk about the characters to whatever extent you feel comfortable, because I think it's really important that we don't give too much away.
Yeah. I don't even know where it started, but I have long just loved really useless powers that have that serve no purpose, that don't really do anything, or aren't really much more than just a burden on the people who have it. And there's been quite a few magical realism novels like that. Also, it's like Karen Russell and Kelly Link and people like that do so beautifully.
In a review of yours mentioned the Stephen Amsterdam book, Things the
Yes.
Fans Needed, which I love as well, which I hadn't thought of when I read yours. Yeah,
no, that was definitely an influence on it too. Like, I love that book as well. Like, so it was really kind of fun to just play around with what do these kind of stories where it's powers that they don't impact the plot, they impact the characters. Was just something that I was really interested in exploring, and having the kind of having, I guess, the build of it across the stories and the way that it plays into relationships, and the way it kind of reveals connections between characters where they wouldn't necessarily expect it. Again, it's not about driving plot, but it's about driving, I think, character and connection. Is what I was interested in exploring with magic. And also I just love magic. I just think it's incredible. And there's so many authors who I just deeply admire, who I think just do it much better than me and like magnificently. And like, you know, Isabel Allende is one of my favorite authors, and reading her stuff, it's just, I love that, you know, so much of her stuff's very, you know, kind of familial and family drama, and what the magical realism does to amplify themes and elements of the story, which I hope that I was able to do at least a bit with the rabbits.
And like you said, character and connection as well. I also want to ask you about the beauty of some of your figurative language in the novel. So you've got lines like, the rain pours down like cream from a jar, which I loved, and rotten fruit is potent as a spell. And all of these add to a lush and very visceral sense of place. This is my second last question, then we'll go to people. Can you talk us through those moments of writing more than you need, paring it back, and the best moments of your editing phase?
Yeah, I am an overwriter, so I do need to be honed in. I think descriptions can run away with me because I kind of get into the mood of it, and it just really, really comes really easily. And it's something that I really love to do, and I love descriptions, and I love grounding people in space. And I think that creating that kind of textural component and that sensory component of storytelling is amazing. It's something that I work really hard on to try and get better at as well, and to make more interesting descriptions, but also ones that, you know, really ring true to the moment. During the editing process, there's always a paring back of them, and a very much a tightening up of them. And so I did that quite a bit on my own beforehand, but it had a big edit in with Penguin, which was good. But it was great. It's like, let yourself go, and then you let them rein you in a bit. Yeah, exactly. And it's very much as well, you know, it's like, there was one in particular, actually, there was one kind of longer metaphorical section, which I loved. And the first edit that I got back from Penguin was like, I think we can probably cut this. I don't think it's needed. And I was like, I'm pretty attached to it. She was, leave it for the next draft. Don't worry, leave it in for now. And the next draft came back, and they're like, have we thought more about cutting this bit? And I was like, I really don't want to. And I think it was the last edit that my copy editor was like, I actually do agree that I think it needs to go. And I ended up reading the whole chapter aloud, because I was like, I'll just read it aloud and I'll just see. And I got to, as soon as I started reading it aloud, I was like, it's got to go.
Wow.
And it was gutting. I was like, it's been so right.
And you're like, hey guys, I've got some news. This bit has to go. Why has it remained in here for so long?
I know. It was a bit of a gutting moment, but it's true. You know, it's the kill your darlings thing is tragically real.
Yeah, read it aloud and then kill the darlings. Yep. Yeah. Almost time for audience questions. I've got a couple more, but I'll give you this one if that's okay. You are, you know, you're this talented arts worker, you're a theatre worker, you're a podcaster, you're a writer. Any chance you can provide some hints about your next work in progress?
Yeah, well, I've had a TV show optioned, so I'm developing that, which is very exciting, which is about, it's about science, but it's also about rural Australia. So it's kind of set up in a community, a bit like Mount Isa. So it's kind of in that very dusty mining town, but it's also, it's science fiction. So it's very much around themes of women's body autonomy and fertility and science. So that's exciting.
That's a TV show.
As a TV show, yeah. But the other book I'm working on at the moment is a book which is set against the real tour that Harry Houdini did of Australia in 1910. Because a lot of people don't know that he toured Australia in 1910, and he went to Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney. And he was also the first person to fly a plane in Australia, which is hotly contested these days. But there are stories that someone got out there the day before. But again, it's not really about that. It's a mystery adventure novel, which is kind of set against that as a backdrop. And it's, you know, if The Rabbits is about magic where you least expect it, Flight is about there being no magic where you expect it the most.
That's outstanding. What a great idea for a book for you to write.
Yeah.
That's a great book for you to write.
Thank you. I'm excited. It's been fun to write. I've been working on it for a while, but it's been fun to work on. So.
Excellent. I look forward to reading that one. A while, like several years, Sophie?
Yeah, not several, but I think 3 or 4 at this point. Yeah. Excellent. But it's been a very research heavy one though as well. You
sound like you always have lots of projects on the go, which is another smart bit of advice, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, you never know what's going to be the one.
You don't.
No.
Chrissy Neen, do we have some audience questions? And I have more as well.
Audience questions, and I want to see that show that you're working on the site.
Thank you.
Of course. Look, we do have audience questions, but before we go into them, I want to read out a comment from Cass because it made me a bit teary. And Cass says, I wanted to say that the lovely faces of Stacey, Claire and Sophie Overett were inextricably entwined with the Brisbane writing scene when I first began meeting writers, and both were so friendly, helpful, generous and inclusive. I'm so happy for this success and I can't wait to read The Rabbits. Love that good things are happening to good people. And I think that really sums it up for a lot of people. And so I just wanted to read that out because, Sophie, you have touched a lot of people's lives. And I think that this is the universe paying it back to you, really, having this book out in the world, which is great. A start, anyway. I think you know, a little bit more than this, but anyway, that's fine. But there's a question from Deborah. And Deborah has said, I'm intrigued by the title, which is clearly their last name, but I'd love to know why you chose it for both. So why did you choose it for the title and for the last name?
Well, originally, this book went through a lot of different titles, and they were all not good. It was like one of those things that was really kind of workshopping it. And when I ended up calling it The Rabbits, it was very much a working title. Like I thought I was going to come up with this new amazing hook of a title. And then I did come up with a different one, which was Who You Were Is Gone. And I sent it to a friend who had done some proofreading on it for me. And she was like, I like The Rabbits better. And so The Rabbits just sort of stuck. And I think it became it was an easier one to say. And I think people are intrigued by it as it's kind of a simpler title, but also, you know, rabbits in Australia have had a fraught relationship over time. Yeah, so it just kind of stuck. And the surname, they just came into my head as The Rabbits. Charlie Rabbit was his name from as soon as he popped up into my head. So it was just kind of a funny thing.
Fantastic. And I think that was also the question from Gemma, but who also mentioned Updike as a reference for that.
Yeah.
I also think Watership Down, but anyway, which is one of my favourite books when I was a kid. So Danielle has asked, I assume you can get very attached to your projects. Is it difficult to let go and get excited about a new project? And how do you deal with leaving those characters behind?
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, because you spend so long with them and working with them. And I mean, I had a manuscript that was shortlisted for the Text Prize, which is a young adult manuscript. And it was it's not the rabbits, it's a different one. And that one I don't think is ever going to find a home, which makes me really sad because I love those characters a lot. And I've just never really, I think, found their audience, I guess. But again, it becomes this sort of thing, like when you think about, coming back to that Stephen King quote, about how the first book you write is you learning how to write a book. I feel like every single project that I've worked on, all the characters that I've spent time with, I think have taught me something as a writer, and that I've learned something from them, even if maybe they don't get to leave the bottom drawer, so to speak. Yeah.
And what was the book that you were working on when you submitted the rabbits to the prize?
It was actually Flight, which is that Houdini novel, which is exciting. But like I said, I was trying to get that draft done, and it would have been way too early to have submitted. It would have been an early draft, as opposed to the rabbits, which have been through several drafts at that point. This would have been like the first or the second, because it had a draft already, so it would have been the second draft, which is still rough.
I want to ask too, because you've written a lot of short stories that have been published before this, and Laura is a short story writer, but is also working on a novel. And there's such a different mindset between writing something in a longer form and writing something in a short form. I want to ask you a little bit about where you feel comfortable. Do you feel like one of them is more suited to your voice, or how do you feel about short form versus long form?
It's tricky. I find I can't work on them at the same time. I find it really hard to write short stories when I'm like really deep into a novel, which can be a bit complicated sometimes, particularly as you see opportunities pass by and think that you're missing out because you're trying to focus on a bigger story. But I mean, I love both a lot, and I love reading short stories a lot. I love Laura's short stories a lot, and so it becomes complicated, I think, but short form is one, though, too, where I just think you can do so much with it. And in a lot of ways, sometimes I think you can be more creative with short stories than you can be with novels. Because I think with novels, there are expectations, which you can probably speak to as well. You've got, there's a lot of, you've got expectations around story, there's expectations of how you kind of feature characters and having main characters and supporting characters, and the way people move through a story is quite, even though you can do a lot with a novel, there's still quite a defined arc that's important in terms of reader expectations. Whereas short stories, you can kind of do anything. I feel like you can kind of really play around a lot more with voice and tone and characters and structure, which again is probably why it's such different headspace.
For sure. Are you ever going back to short stories, by the way?
Yeah, I'm hoping to. I'm trying to set some time aside later in this year to do exclusively work on short stories.
Cool. We've got a couple of other questions from the audience. So Hayley has asked, I know you said you've moved on from the rabbits, but could we ever see more of Mindy's story?
I'd be tempted to. I actually have written a novella which has Olive a few years later. And I don't know if that'll ever see the light of day either, but it's one that I feel she's a minor character in that. And I could definitely see Mindy becoming a minor character in something else, or even a supporting character. I don't know if she'd be a lead in something, but yeah, I could definitely see her being in something else.
Well, that's cool. I know that Jenna Diaz's work is all connected. There's characters through everything. Be interesting to see if you have that in you too. So there's a question, not a question maybe. Verity has said, congratulations, Sophie. One thing I'm always intrigued about is how covers are developed. Yes, so do you have any input into the design of the cover of your book?
Yeah, so we had, I had a conversation with Penguin about like if I wanted, the big question at the start was, do I want an illustrated cover or a photographed cover? And then we talked a lot about kind of colour and about, I really wanted a garden on the cover. I felt like the garden was really important, and the garden, especially how overgrown the garden is kind of this, and again, this is coming back to Laura's point, it wasn't something that I'd originally thought about when I wrote it, but during kind of the editing process, how overgrown the yard was and how untended kind of became symbolic of how untended the family relationships were to each other. So that kind of became really significant to me in that process. So I just liked the idea of having the garden in the cover. And they asked about colours as well. And I just said I didn't mind colours, but I wanted it to be bright because I love a bright colour. And then so yes, they developed that, and then so they sent it back, and then I got some opportunities to offer feedback on certain elements. But the design was pretty much set from then. But it's good. It's good that I love it. So
very collaborative, I reckon.
Yeah.
But are there any other questions from the audience? I think we've come to the end of these ones. Any other questions that people want to throw in there? Laura, you've unmuted yourself.
I've got more questions. If you don't mind, Sophie.
Yeah.
And if someone who's listening has another one, we still have time. You can send it through to Chrissy. Sophie, you and I have spoken briefly about tertiary writing courses, and I love what Cass said about you and lovely Stacey Claire and Amy Lindorf, who's probably here tonight as well, just being helpful and practical and guiding quite a few baby writers around. But you and I have spoken a bit about tertiary writing courses, and I know you're across a lot of that, life for many writers, even though you yourself didn't do creative writing at university. But in terms of writing craft or, wide reading or sentence level stuff or marketing and social media, what are some other things that have made a difference for you? You talked about Oregon. What are some other things?
Yeah, so definitely Tin House, definitely having, the opportunities that I've had, like the Catherine Susanna Pritchard writing residency and the QLA fellowship, giving you opportunities to write. But definitely courses, definitely craft books. And especially, I always recommend Twyla Tharp's The Creative Habit. And she's actually a choreographer. She's a ballet choreographer. But her book is about creating good habits around creativity. It tracks her actually choreographing a new ballet over 6 weeks. But it's just about kind of helping you to establish good habits around creativity, which is amazing. And it's nice to, I think, see it from different art form perspectives, because I think there's a lot more crossover. I think in particular literature and writing can feel really siloed a lot of the time from different art forms, whereas things like theatre, there's so much crossover between dance and opera and singing or even art installations. Whereas, literature can feel like, oh, we talk about writing, we're in this thing just talking exclusively about that. Whereas so to kind of expose yourself more to different art forms and to look at the ways other types of mediums approach narrative and storytelling, because everything has a narrative, I think. And just doing courses, craft books, having conversations with people, writers groups are really valuable. And I think it's all just being a critical consumer of what you read and watch. And I always really believe that you learn as much from what you don't like as what you do like. And I think there's this idea that people, especially when they come into writing and when they're young, are like, oh, I've got to look at, this is kind of, I think, one of the things that universities can do, unfortunately, sometimes. It's like, oh, we're going to look at this canon of literature. This is all fantastic, great stuff that you should be working on, not emulating, but learning from. But again, I think that, I learned as much from Twilight as I learned from The Great Gatsby, and through reading that process and being like, okay, well, I don't like the way this story turned here. Why didn't I like that?
Yeah.
And thinking kind of critically about how you can apply that to your own writing and being like, okay, well, actually, that was a really underdeveloped story arc. Why was it underdeveloped? Why didn't I like the choices these characters made? And the best part about that, though, too, is even though it does tend to turn your hobbies into work, it's something that I think is really accessible, that everyone can do. Because, if people don't have access maybe to books, you can still do it with TV shows that you're watching or movies that you're able to see. And just thinking, because it's all narrative structure, that's all story, that's all character arcs.
You're so devoted to teaching yourself things and learning more and reading widely. That Twyla Tharp book, so many people have recommended that to me and I've never bought it. So maybe I'll
great. It's a good
go
one
on to Avid Reader and buy it later or something.
Yeah.
Just finally, if there's no other one, Chrissy.
There's a couple of other ones, but
okay, I'll stop. Yep, you go.
Okay, so that book, by the way, was The Creative Habit. If anyone wants to order that one, we'll look into getting that in. There is an email from Stacey Clare here, and after the comments about Stacey Clare, I thought I'd read that out. Lots of love from Stacey. And could you tell us a little more about how you came to be represented by Brisbane literary agent superhero Alex Adsett, who is here with us today? So how did you snaffle Alex?
Well, it was hilariously after the press release came out about me winning the prize, I had quite a few agents come out of the woodwork, including 2 who'd already rejected the rabbits, which was a bit of a hilarious experience. Although one of them did very kindly open their email with, I guess I got that wrong. So that was nice to read at least. But yeah, then so I kind of had a couple of chats, but I knew Alex really well, and Alex is such an amazing part of the Brisbane writing scene and the community, and does such awesome work. So I was just really thrilled when she hit me up, and yeah, it's been great.
Fantastic. And another question here from Emma. Are there any mistakes or things that you wish you'd done differently along this journey?
On this journey,
in this book.
I think so, actually. I think it's all like every mistake that you make, you learn from, so then it becomes valuable in the long run. I think maybe there are certainly, like I said at the start of this, there's probably a couple of things that I would have written differently now than I did when I started, but it's also like I'm proud of what it is. And even during the editing process, when I had opportunities to change it, I was like, I actually like it because I think it's a part of the story that this is telling, and it's a part of my journey as a writer, and it's stuff, and because I'm so proud of the overall product, I think it works for what it is. Which is probably a weird thing to say, I don't know. But also, you know, in the kind of submissions process, I think I submit to a couple of publishers too early, which would be the one mistake I think I would probably change. But again, you learn from that. And I think learning how to submit is, again, something you learn how to submit through submitting, and learning how to, and even when you're submitting a bit too early, maybe it gives you the chance to redraft synopses and learn how to write a cover letter and learn what the submission process actually looks like too. Yeah.
Well, that's very useful. And there's one last question. You have mentioned drawing a couple of times as being important. Yeah. Do you, like, where does that come from? What do you draw?
Yeah, I always wanted to work in animation, which never happened. I was going to submit a folio when I finished high school to the QCA, and I chickened out at the last minute, and I never it was something that I ended up getting quite estranged to myself, and I've come back to it at different points. And the reality is I'm not a great drawer, I'm not a great artist by any stretch of the imagination, but I love the process of drawing, and I love this kind of concept that it's a way of capturing moments in time, which is kind of one of the things that I think Delia feels drawn to with drawing. And, you know, that was that kind of way of capturing the memories of her lost sister and her lost son through drawing became a really central part of the novel, which just to me spoke to the characters and spoke to the overall theme, again, of just being seen.
Fantastic. We will close the questions off there. It has been really, really fascinating listening to you guys, and also a bit of a masterclass in how to write. So I coming to these fiction events because we've got 2 amazing writers talking to each other, and of course we're going to get tips and tricks. So I think that another way to learn is to read, and of course that segues into the fact that we should all race out to that link that I shared earlier and buy your book and celebrate by reading the book and learning through reading. Laura's holding up the book there. I don't know if you can see her in the edge. Very beautiful cover, and so is Alex. Very, very happy to be spending tonight with you guys. Thank you so much for all of that. And we'll see you on the flip side, hopefully in real life at some point soon. So thanks very much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. See you.